All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Gerry Viggiani. I'm a licensed social worker and founder and owner of Lotus Psychotherapy, mental health and wellness for women. My team and I treat all things women's mental health, and I'm really excited to present this because as a social worker, we look at the world from a holistic approach, right? So if all areas in our life are balanced. There we go. In our life is balanced. I'm sorry. Hold on. Okay. If everything is balanced, then we are more successful because we've reduced vulnerabilities in our life. So maintaining a work-life balance, right? Although I think that the world has told us otherwise, that we should be work all the time. In knowing that if our life isn't balanced, we can create stress for us unnecessarily, burnout, which would look like, a lack of interest, exhaustion. So having that balance keeps us mentally happy and stable. If we're physically fit, then more likely there's going to be less call outs. We're more productive because we are happy and connected and not exhausted. Our relationships with staff, colleagues, friends are more stable. And at the end of the day, we can be more successful. So on this graph, I focused on physical, emotional, relational, occupational, safety, and intellectual. But if you notice, at its center is self-care. So I'm not going to go through this entire thing, but one major issue for all of this is sleep hygiene. And I would imagine that a lot of you are looking at social media before going to bed, or watching something exciting on TV, or maybe we've sort of abused ourselves by having a lot of caffeine during the day. And this all adds up to not a great night's sleep. Sleep is when we recharge and rejuvenate ourselves. So it's really important that we do that well. So we talk about having a routine before bed. And if we think about when we're children, what did we always have when we were going to bed? We had, bath, story time, quiet, lights low, setting up the perfect environment for going to sleep. And we need to do that too. So having like a regular bedtime and a regular bedtime routine helps our brain understand that it's bedtime. Budgeting about 30 minutes before bed is really great. So again, dimming the lights, staying away from bright lights, but also staying away from blue light. Unplugging from electronics 30 to 60 minutes pre-bed, the horror. But that blue light does stimulate our brain and it makes it think it's daylight or daytime. And that can get in the way, but also, looking at things that are stimulating on social media or aggravating or annoying or hurtful can definitely get in the way of sleep too. And then you can test out methods of relaxation during that 30 to 60 minutes. There's tons of apps out there, Breathe and Calm and Insight Timer, that have all kinds of sleep meditations or bedtime stories to help us get into that restful relaxation space. You can do breathing exercises, which we'll talk about in a moment. And at its end, if you find that you've been tossing and turning for more than 20 minutes while you're trying to go to sleep, then I would suggest not continuing to do that, but to actually get up, not for the day, right? But to get up and, maybe go get yourself a glass of water or have a little snack or read a magazine or something, listen to something that's kind of like monotonous and boring, and then try to go back to sleep again. As this can be helpful to interrupt like that thought cycle that we have when we're not sleeping well. And then I threw in the end there, of course, avoiding caffeine. Caffeine is in tea, it's in chocolate, it's in soda. Even a lot of clear sodas also have caffeine in it. So just being mindful at looking at that, and then trying to stop having caffeine, after like 3 o'clock or so, if possible. Oh, and I forgot to say, I'm going to go through the slides, but please, if you have questions, either put them in the chat box or just save it for the end, because there's a lot of material that Catherine wants me to share. So I'm just trying to get through that. Catherine had mentioned to me covering mental health self-checks. Reason being is when we go through our day, we kind of get into like work mode, right? Or busy everyday life mode. And we tend to ignore signs and symptoms that we should be looking into. And so mindfulness, which I'll reflect on the next page, is a great way to be present enough or have the insight enough into checking in on yourself. It can be invaluable in reducing vulnerabilities, but also in catching things before they get worse. So there are areas that we can check in on. We can check in on our feelings. So how am I feeling today? Am I sad? Am I anxious? Am I angry? Am I content? Am I happy? And noticing what types of things are leading to that emotional experience. Checking in on our sleep. So are we getting enough sleep? Are we following through on that sleep hygiene? Checking in on our body. We tend to like stay sort of in our heads, and it's often valuable to check in on our bodies and see how we're feeling physically. Are we noticing anything new? Are we storing tension somewhere? Do we need to pay attention to those things? Paying attention to our thoughts. So what kind of thoughts am I having today? Am I ruminating over a problem? Am I feeling sort of all over the place or overwhelmed? And then lastly, checking in on our reactivity and our behaviors. So maybe I'm ignoring that I'm angry or resentful at a coworker, but I'm being snappy with people, or I'm being short. So checking into that reactivity, and is there something that we can dial back or reinforce? We can do this through meditation. Again, there's a lot of guided meditations on those apps. We can do it through journaling. We can actually do a body scan where we just check in with our bodies step by step, and see where we're feeling tension or anxiety. As I alluded to before, mindfulness is the key piece to actually being present with what we're doing, right? And when we're present, we're available to all these places in our minds and bodies and feelings, so that we can make changes if we need to, or we can be content with where we are at. This just reflects a bunch of ways that you can practice mindfulness, but knowing that when you're practicing mindfulness, that you're doing that in a non-judgmental way, right? So we're just labeling and describing things that are there through our senses. The moment that you add like good, bad, ugly, that's not non-judgmental practice, right? That's giving it a judgmental label, even if it's a good judgmental label. But mindfulness helps us to practice how to pay attention to what is separate from judgment. And that gives us a clearer answer to how we're doing. So you can take a moment to look at those. Okay. So at my practice, we practice something called dialectical behavioral therapy. And dialectical behavioral therapy talks about 4 components of health. So interpersonal effectiveness, mindfulness, distress tolerance. So if we're very overwhelmed or very, very upset or very, very low, ways to kind of bring us back into the moment. And the last is emotion regulation. So the emotion regulation skills talk about checking in, as I said earlier, on our feelings and emotions, learning how to regulate them more properly. But for the sake of thinking about checking in our bodies, there's something called the please skills. And the please skills have us look at, are we treating our physical illnesses? So are we taking our medications as prescribed? Are we going for routine checkups? Or are we checking in on our body regularly? And if there are things that need to be addressed, following through and taking care of those things. Are we eating a balanced diet? So are we skipping meals? Are we eating too much? Are we eating too little? Are we not eating a balanced diet? All things that can help us to feel better about ourselves. Avoiding mood altering substances. So drinking, drugs, anything like that, because they create an artificial shift in our emotions that can alter our whole outlook. Balanced sleep, we talked about that. And then getting exercise, regular exercise, keeping our bodies moving. I have this little worksheet. So the sheet it just simply looks at all those areas that I discussed, right? And we're just writing down what we did each day to practice these skills. And it gives you a better idea of where there might be areas that you need to work on. There we go. So, and then it asks at the end, were these things helpful or not helpful? So that maybe looking for having some insight in how we might have areas that need to change. I can also send this to anyone that's interested, just put it in the chat box. The next thing is building mastery. So building self-esteem and confidence in the things that you do that make you feel in control, confident, and capable. So if I do something like, let's say I'm learning how to play the piano, and the first time that I actually string together a song, like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and I'm like, yes, I did it, right? That feeling has its own glow that lasts. And our brain then starts to be able to apply that mastery to other areas in our life. So the suggestion really is to try to do something, at least one thing a day, to build a sense of accomplishment. So that doesn't mean that you have to, learn how to play piano. It could be any hobby. It could be I'm starting an exercise routine, and the first day I walk to the end of my street, and I keep practicing that until now I'm walking around the park, right? So that building that sense of accomplishment. Or maybe it's something at work that's been difficult for me. So being able to build up to that mastery. We always want to plan for success, not failure. So the things that we're building mastery towards We want them to be difficult, but possible. So again, if I go back to that exercise example, right? So if I wanted to run a marathon, I wouldn't be able to say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to run a marathon if I've never even walked around the park. So we need to start a little smaller, and then, as it says in 3, gradually increase the difficulty. So if it's a little too hard, you ease up a little. If it's a little too easy, you make it a little harder next time. And then, as Patricia alluded to in the earlier talk, really knowing that through the pandemic, our connection with other people has really kind of fell off, right? And I was talking with a friend the other day, and she had read an article, and she had described the experience of the pandemic as languishing. So languishing meaning it's humdrum, it's everyday, it's this feeling of not being connected, not being able to string together experiences. As human beings, we are herd animals, H-E-R-D, herd animals. And we really need to connect with others to feel self-actualized and fulfilled. So how do we do that? In the time of the pandemic, many of us have tried to do that through Zoom or texting or phone. And as we're emerging, hoping that we can start to also do these things in person, because we really need each other. So seeking out meaningful and supportive relationships. We need to water those relationships like we water flowers. Being able to, when we feel connected, lift others up and also be lifted and connected. The relationships that we have help you to generate creativity, productivity, energy, excitement, and everything that we do is transactional, right? So if I'm having a really good day and I come in and I'm like, oh, hi, Susan, how are you doing today? You know, more likely than not, Susan is going to give that back to me, right? Because we're connected to each other. Whereas if I'm closed off, other people are going to be closed off from me. And then that's going to negatively impact all of those things. So where can we connect with others, particularly for young adults who were out of school, where they had this really maybe connected experience with the other students? Coming out on the other side of that, I hear a lot from my young adult clients is, well, where do I meet people? So volunteering is a great way, especially as we're coming out of the pandemic. Doing networking. So networking events like this, I've made some of my closest friends through being part of the chamber. I can take a class, just a class for leisure, right? Like learning how to crochet or making pottery, going to the gym. So again, those restrictions are starting to ease up. So you see the same people at the gym all the time, or a class that you might take in the gym. Or joining a sports league as well, right? So connecting with those same people. There's an app called Meetups. Meetups is a great way to meet up with other people. You actually can put your interest in, and it points you into the direction of meetup groups that have the same interest as you and when they're meeting. How do we learn how to connect with people? We can do that through mentorship, right? So an adult that you have observed that's really connected to other people. You can do that through observation. You can do that through assertiveness or self-esteem training, right? So being able to set boundaries and limits and learning how to connect with others. And it takes practice. So practicing with people that you do trust so that you can build upon those skills. And lastly, really important piece is living your life, taking a step back and actually finding enjoyment, love, connection, mastery, all of those things. So stringing activities together that provide joy, happiness, peace, relaxation, a sense of enlightenment, power, and connection, right? So some examples of the pictures on top is getting together with friends, doing yoga or exercise or mindfulness, going to places you love, right? Traveling to them, even simply going and sitting in Starbucks if that's what you like to do, and you're comfortable doing so. If you're not comfortable going out, creating memories at home, like at home with my adult daughters and my husband. Through the pandemic, we've actually gone back to playing board games, gone back to having family dinners. Oh, goodness, it's already time. Sorry, folks. Any questions?